To the contrary, no. Carried. We come now to item number 14, which is the setting up of the advisory panels. So I'd ask Carol Hayward and Marguerite Delbay to come forward, please. I am happy to move the resolution. Maybe Councillor Casey, you'd like to second that. The resolution deals with the re-establishment of our demographic advisory panels, our sector advisory panels, and the updated terms of reference. So, Carol or Marguerite, one of you might like to lead off on that.
Tēnā koutou, good morning, Your Worship and councillors. The advisory panels were first established in 2010 to ensure that the views and needs of Auckland's diverse communities are heard and incorporated in the council's decision making. Each term, the panels have been evaluated to inform changes going into the new term, and I'd like to thank ReMove for their work that has informed the proposed changes set out in this paper. Key findings during the evaluation were that the panels provided valuable input into key strategic planning and policy documents. They provide us with opportunities to build unique relationships with our diverse communities. And they are well supported by liaison councillors, lead officers and deputy lead officers. However, there are improvements that we could be making going into the new term around building the sense of team with the panels at the start of term, helping them to understand their role when they are appointed, and thinking about some of the challenges that are now facing us as we go into the fourth term. For example, around the having a sense of when do people when should a term, how long should panel members stay within the council family? There are also some challenges facing us around the youth advisory panel and thinking around the super diversity of Auckland, and some of those are in the recommendations too. So recommendations that have been made within this paper include to reduce the size of the youth advisory panel and to remove the geographical connection. To ensure that the panel can receive views from across the region, the intention could be that we facilitate connections with local board youth voice panels and other youth leadership groups to ensure that diversity of views is heard and to create strong networks across Auckland and a recruitment channel for the youth advisory panel. One of the other recommendations with respect to the youth advisory panel members was to increase their remuneration in line with the other panels. The youth advisory panels work as hard as all of the other demographic panels, and the intention is to recruit them at a strategic level so that they can continue to provide that strategic advice at the same level. With respect to other panels, the Ethnic Peoples Advisory Panel, we are looking to think about the different skills that might be required going into the new term. For example, to support the development of guidelines on how to engage with minority ethnic panels. But a very key point is to try and increase diversity across all of the panels. For example, within the Pacific panel, there is a heavy Samoan influence, and we're looking to try and reduce, try and broaden that.
Just remind who beat the Australians at League on Saturday, just to bring people's spirits down a little bit.
Looking into the new term, we're considering what things that the panels might get involved with, and climate change is a key area of concern for the council, so it's something that we could be referring to during recruitment. The improvement of our engagement guidelines is another area of focus, and thinking about that ongoing connection with the Auckland Plan's belonging and participation outcome. For the sector advisory panels, the feedback from the evaluation was that the rural and the city centre were working very well and needed very little change. One change to the report that's in front of you that has come through since the paper was published was that we do not now recommend a change in the way that the chair of the Auckland City Centre Advisory Board is appointed, and we wish to continue, we recommend continuing with the same process that it is selected by members of the board annually. The Heritage Advisory Panel is one of the panels that did get some feedback during the evaluation. It wasn't working quite as well as we might have hoped, and we recommend some changes going into the new term. I consider it a little bit of a hybrid. It's partly community representatives and partly experts on the panel. And so thinking about that in terms of the way it works, the changes that have been recommended are partly in line with that. And thinking about how that panel might work going forward. The workload is likely to be lighter than some of the other panels to start with. So thinking that it might meet less frequently and look at some new voices coming into the group. The other change that we're suggesting across all of the panels, apart from increasing diversity, is also to increase the Māori representation. At the moment, all of the panels state a recommendation of at least one person with Te Ao Māori experience, and we're suggesting doubling that for all of the panels, apart from for the Pacific and ethnic. I think that's it in a kind of a nutshell. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. First of all, questions from councillors, Councillor Walker and then Councillor Coombe.
Sure. So I've taken a particular interest over some time in the Heritage Panel. I've attended a number of the meetings and spoken with a number of the members on the panel, and I'm certainly aware of their frustration, which stems from not having an effective conduit to council. And then the other frustration is the absolute loss of heritage that we are experiencing across Auckland, especially important parts of our built heritage. So I've got particular concern around the notion that they actually meet less. Yes, you're absolutely right. We don't have the unitary plan as such an issue. Having said that, the flow-on effect from the unitary plan is that we are losing heritage, and we have any number of developers that are really pushing the envelope. So I certainly haven't had feedback from them around meeting less. The feedback that I've had is it's vital to have continuity, it's vital to have a conduit, and that needs to be regular. So I just want to put that up there. But the other changes certainly are desirable, and I would note that having people that are representative of community but also experts, I have found to be excellent, and excellent in terms of governance, because these people know their stuff. In fact, some of them know their stuff phenomenally well. So I'd certainly invite some response from you around that, and then I have another question.
Councillor, I'll start with your questions around a conduit to provide advice. One of the recommendations we will make in the terms of reference for the new term is that the sector panels be attached to the planning committee, so it provides that conduit the same way the demographic panels will have that conduit to the community committee. And of course, it doesn't mean that if they want to provide advice on things that another committee are considering, they can do that as well. So that will provide that avenue that you are asking for. I'll let Carol respond on the frequency of the meetings.
Through you, Chair. The frequency of the meetings, I'm certainly happy to reconsider that. At the moment, they have been meeting every 2 months. The concern from staff was whether there would be enough content to manage that number of meetings, but going into the new term, if we're looking to broaden the scope of the Heritage Panel, or to consider the content that it may be able to cover, then we may be able to find sufficient to keep it running. One of the other changes that we've proposed with the Heritage Panel is that we can get we've agreed some more communication support, so that we can actually use that as an opportunity to promote heritage issues more strongly with the community and through the council publications.
Councillor, second question.
Sure. The second question is about the panels that we've got. I've been an advocate, and certainly was an advocate in the first term under Len Brown, to have an environment and climate change panel. We don't have any panel, we don't have any representation from the community around those issues. And consistently I've advocated that these are some of the most important issues that we need feedback from the community on, especially climate change, but equally environment. So we have, for example, a rural advisory panel, heritage, nothing around the environment. I would suggest that that could use some consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Coombe. Microphone, please.
Thank you. It was good to hear the update around the change of recommendation around selecting the chair of the City Centre Advisory Board, because I know they've worked very effectively in terms of selecting their own chair. So when we refer to the updated terms of reference, I'm just struggling to find where it's referenced. So in the report it says the recommendation is that the mayor selects the chair, so that it is on the agenda that the updated version. Just if you could just give me a page reference, because I'm just want to be clear on what the updated terms of reference are.
It's not in the published papers, so it will need to be in the revisions agreed today. So the wording that was used in the last term, which we'll make the changes after today, was the chair and deputy chair will be elected by the members of the board at a board meeting for a term of 12 months, and thereafter annually at a meeting determined by the ACCAB. The chair and deputy chair may be re-elected, and then the 3 elected members on the board are ineligible to be appointed as chair and deputy chair. So that's
The updated terms of reference.
that could.
No, the intention was to reflect the decisions of today in the terms of reference.
So just to get clarification of that, we're reverting to the status quo where, as you've read out, the members elect their own chair, because I don't agree with the fact that I should appoint the chair, should come from the group. It's a question of how that's reflected in this paper, so that somebody reading this paper isn't under the misapprehension that we're changing something that we're not. So if you can give us a recommendation on how that would be reflected in this paper, that would be helpful.
Okay, well, we can craft a recommendation just for you to vote on, to say, agree that the appointment of the chair of CCAB remains unchanged.
Okay, we'd add that to the recommendations that we're voting on today. That might clear that point up for you, Councillor Coombe.
Thank you.
If I may make a comment, Mr. Mayor and Councillor, my understanding is that it has sometimes been difficult to appoint the chair and the deputy chair of the board, just because people are really busy, and so the fact that we don't change the appointment process doesn't preclude the board to go and appoint an independent chair if they wanted to.
But the starting point is that they can organise themselves.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. Important to clear that point up. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. And I have asked this question of you before, but with the disability panel, to what degree are they working with the disability group that was established under Auckland Transport? So have we seen a sort of hybrid model emerge there? Because obviously the issue of accessibility for our disabled community is really important across the board.
The disability, we don't have any formal connection with the Auckland Transport, public transport group, but the chair of the Disability Advisory Panel also sat on that group. So there's no formal link at the moment. I have been in discussion with Auckland Transport, who are looking to renew or re-recruit for both their public transport and their second community panel, to look at how do we connect more strongly going into the new term, and how do we in particular reach through our networks and help increase the diversity. So they were particularly interested in younger disabled people to go onto their panel. So at the moment the relationship is informal and just trying to strengthen it going into the new term.
Thank you for that. Your Worship, I would draw attention to the fact that we have an opportunity for that work to be streamlined together in some way. I don't want to take further time on that. The other is I share Councillor Walker's concern over the Heritage Panel. in the evolution of the unitary plan, there was much discussion about pre-1944 in the absence of doing an individual survey of properties that might be noteworthy in terms of heritage. Some of that work has been undertaken and some of it has stalled. I would have rather thought that there might be an opportunity for more of a workload. Would it then require a change in the terms of reference for that work to be undertaken?
The terms of reference currently refer to meeting 2 to 4 times a year, so we could change the frequency of meetings. But I think we also we do talk about so we could change that. That's the main thing.
I think, you know, when we look back at issues like Ihumātao and so forth, and this is going right back in the life of the council, but we were looking for heritage advice when the special housing matter was put before the council, and I think that there is a role that the Heritage Panel could be providing that is unmet at the moment. The third I was going to just touch on, which has been raised already, I believe that much of the good in terms of environmental outcomes, Your Worship, is actually being undertaken by not-for-profits. So if we are to be serious about the strategies that we want to put in place in terms of the environment and climate change, and I'll be guided by the Chair, Richard Hills, on this, I think we do need, if we're going to derive the benefits of these panels, we do need to be working with the not-for-profit sector more effectively. And I wonder whether it's through a panel that we could achieve that to get some representation of the work that is already being undertaken, or whether it might be through some other avenue. Is that a consideration, Carol, that has been given to, where the evaluations that you've been undertaking, that there might be a need for working more effectively and collaboratively with our not-for-profit sector?
It's not come through in the evaluation at this stage, no.
Again, I don't want to occupy the time of this, but I wonder, sir, whether you would give some further thought to that, because I think it is a really splendid opportunity where the council could be working with our environmental groups and volunteer not-for-profits.
Be happy to do that. I think there's 3 points, Councillor, you've raised that we'd like our team to come back on. One, just the connection between our disability panel and the transport disability panel, and it might be by at least 1 or 2 members in common membership, but I'm happy to look at any other way. Secondly, heritage. I think we'd got to the point in answer to Councillor Walker's comment that maybe if we go back to the every 2 months, and if it proves that there isn't a workload, then we can make the change. But of course, it's a bit like committees around here. If we have a lesser workload, the meetings go more quickly, although sometimes Parkinson's law does cut in. And the third one, I think Councillor Fletcher has raised legitimately, is let's have a look at how we link in the not-for-profit organisations' role with the environment. I think it's a good point. We need to give some more thought to that. You might like to feed in to officers on that, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have a question about the Youth Advisory Panel. So I note that in terms of your proposal to reduce the number of panel members and remove the geographic locations, it says here reducing from 21 to 13 and making that ward-based. Can I ask you why that was not adopted in the response?
The geographical connection has come through very strongly through the evaluation as being a confusing part of the youth panel in particular. All of the other demographic panels are being recruited on a regional perspective to provide advice at a regional level. So the recommendation from officers has been to remove that geographical connection to reduce some of that confusion. The challenge is that if they, the feedback we've had from youth panel members was that they don't quite know how to connect into their local area or whether they're representing the area and what their role is, and it's really confused their role. So it's really about saying we want you there from your own lived experience. When we do the recruitment, we will look for the geographical mix of people, but it's been a little bit less prescriptive.
I understand the issue coming from the local board perspective, and we butted against this as well. But just a follow-up question, Mr. Mayor, thank you. How would you ensure geographic diversity if you're not requiring it? It seems to me as if the ward level might be something that might be a better idea.
Again, reflecting back on the other demographic advisory panels, we don't specify, we don't look for that geographical mix. We're looking for diversity within the panel, but we want to try and make sure that we are reaching beyond those who are just in the city centre or just in a particular urban area. So it's not, it'll just, as we do the recruitment, through that recruitment process, the liaison council will be part of that process to help us get the right mix. So it's really about looking for the opportunities when they come, reaching out to those groups and networks when we do the recruitment. So we will be working with the local boards as part of that recruitment process and just thinking about how do we try and reach those different communities.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Your Worship. Could you please just explain to me a little bit more about the recommendation that wants the panels to retain the community engagement budget, but remove the expectation for the panels to deliver community engagement? So keeping the budget but not doing the work. Sounds a bit Irish. Sorry, not Irish.
Be careful who you're insulting there.
Sorry.
So the panel members during the evaluation raised their confusion, or they really didn't understand what their role was in terms of community engagement. I think they felt an obligation to run community engagement but didn't know why they were doing it. So going into the new term, we're just trying to manage expectations a bit better. We want them to have a role in community engagement, but we don't expect them to organise it is one of the key things that we've struggled with. They've ended up organising their own community engagement activities, but also if they're working, we're trying to kind of make sure it's more streamlined with council activities already. So if the council is consulting on a policy around a bylaw around tattooing again, it's how do they work with the panel, not expecting the panel to run that community engagement on their behalf. So the funding is there to support that process, which is why we recommend that we keep it. But we want to try and make it clear that it's not an obligation for them to actually do all the running for those sorts of activities.
Supplementary. So you've got quite a lot of staff support, and I'm just kind of interested, again, from a budget perspective. The budget's there, so they won't be organising this engagement themselves, but the staff, they'll be working with the staff who currently will be part of a wider engagement that they will link in with. I'm just trying to, I'm still haven't targeted why we're keeping community engagement budget for the panels if they're actually going to link into existing engagement that would be obviously budgeted from a different source.
So just to give you some examples from the last term, the Rainbow Communities Advisory Panel commissioned a piece of research called 3 Questions, which helped to gain perspective of the rainbow communities to help guide their thinking. The Pacific People's Advisory Panel used their budget to run to get media coverage to run their community events. So the couple of events they've taken place this year. So they're a couple of examples. If we're working in partnership with council teams, then there will be some support, but there's not guaranteed support to do that go beyond the normal ways that we do things.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newman.
No, Councillor Henderson asked my questions and they were answered.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments? If you look up on the screen, you'll see the 3 recommendations that have come, formal recommendations that have come arising out of the discussion. We come to comments, and Councillor Casey, as the overlord. Yeah. You might like to comment on it. And can I just take this opportunity to thank you very much for your passion, enthusiasm and hard work on this area.
Well, it's that I want to talk about, not mine, but the work of the panels themselves, the staff who support the panels and the liaison councillors. Now, I was unable to attend the wonderful end of term event because I got punched in the head in Mount Albert on my way in, but that's another story. It was the start of a bad few weeks. So I didn't get to that, and I want to say today what I would have said at that, which is it's an extraordinary, for those councillors who take part in this process over the next 3 years, it's an extraordinary family that is our advisory panels. It's a wonderful opportunity to work alongside volunteers who've given up their time to come in and help the council and give them advice. And I think it's the 12th of November we'll be announcing the liaison councillors and the new overlord. And just that, it's the staff who do the support work on top of their jobs at council are to be commended. The lead officer, the deputy lead officer, and the admin people. We couldn't do the panels without your work. And the councillors who take on this additional role, again, it's outside of your meeting times, but I would like to hear maybe from a couple of them, if you wouldn't mind just saying what you felt as the liaison councillor in the last term. I think the wider council should know it's not just about giving advice, it's extraordinary relationships we build with these vulnerable communities, in that we become familiar, much more familiar with the needs, their needs that they bring to the council table. And that's really what this is all about. It's about making visible the vulnerable communities that don't get the chance. So I'm hoping that Josephine might say something to start us. I hope you don't mind me chairing the meeting, Mr. Mayor.
This is a takeover. No, that's fine. And it was a really great event. And we noted your apologies at it for reasons that we probably didn't go into details at the time about. But I'm happy if others want to comment. I've got Councillor Filipaina, who's already got a place on the speaking list. So, Alf, if you'd like to make any comments.
I won't. I'll leave that to the other councillors. I had the two advisory panels, but everything in the review has been noted. I just want to acknowledge Dr. Dina and Dr. Jesse from Udemu for your report, and also for asking me to have an input in regards to this. Your Worship, and I want to talk about the youth panel and the recommendation in regards to the numbers. I personally don't want the numbers changed. I said this at the beginning of the last term. I've spoken to my two local boards, and I also take on board what Councillor Henderson was talking around geographical. I know they are regional, that the advisory boards are regional. But when you get a situation where some may end up not coming from the south, whether it be Franklin or whether it be the Manukau ward, I really don't have much hope in the fact that the voice around that area, if there's none from the Manukau ward, for example, is not heard. If we're looking at a regional youth advisory panel, and then we then get to a point where through the selection, and we don't know what's going to happen through the selection, but if we get to a point where some of the vulnerable areas that people have been talking about end up being missed out, I really don't have any hope around that voice being heard on the youth panel. And this is why I've always advocated, as well as the two local boards that both Councillor Collins and I represent, this is why they've always wanted their representation from the individual local boards that they represent in the Manukau ward. So, Your Worship, I am not going to vote for the 13. And I see in the report that it's in brackets, that it's on the ward basis. So, I mean, just want to confirm then that if obviously I'm not going to put another recommendation up, that I'll leave that for the debate around whether the youth panel stays at 21. And I've given my reasons on many occasions why I believe it's 21, because you do in fact get the region. But Your Worship, if the majority are going for the 13 as per this recommendation, well, as my late mother always used to say, go with the flow, son. So look, Your Worship, I truly believe that the only way we can get representation across the region is to have now at the 21. I truly believe that, because we may not be represented in the next 3 years as a result. So look, Your Worship, totally agree, and I just again want to acknowledge the two doctors who did the report, but I will not be voting for the 13. I'll just put my vote against it, but still 21 for the youth panel. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I might just ask Carol or Marguerite to come back on that issue. In all of the other demographic panels, I don't think we have, but correct me if I'm wrong, we have any example where we have overwhelmingly them coming from one area. That would defeat the purpose. You're quite right, Councillor. But I think we have managed in our other panels to get that proper geographic representation. And that's not the only factor, but it is a factor. It would be intolerable, for example, as you and Councillor Henderson have said, if either the West or the South wasn't involved, and probably the East and the Central would say the same thing. I know that the representations, the submissions, or the recommendations, I should say, have come after a long period of consultation with the panels themselves, with the stakeholders, and the review of REMU. And my personal view was that 21 was big, and 21 encouraged people to think as not as regional reps, but as local reps, and I didn't think that was desirable either. And it also made it hard in terms of your budget. You know, I think the Youth Advisory Panel members should be paid the same. But if you're paying, you know, was it $250 a meeting or something for 21, you're putting a lot of resource just in attendance, and I'm not sure that you're getting what we want from the advisory panels, which is a cross-section of views from people that are the best placed to be appointed to those panels. But just as I consider Councillor Filipaina's comments, if maybe our staff could comment on that and the reason why we came to where we did. At the moment, we're 21. One consideration was 13. I think the existing recommendation is 8, if I'm correct. So maybe if you can just clarify that point.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is 8 to 12. One of the issues, well, there have been several issues with the number of young people around the Youth Advisory Panel. The first one is they do need more pastoral care, I would say, in terms of helping them provide advice. And so the ability to, there's an element of coaching and development that goes with them being on the panel as well, which our staff provide, which is different obviously from the other panels. And just being able to provide that care and that support to 21 young people has been more difficult. They have told us themselves that they find that having 21 people around the table makes the discussions and the decision making more difficult. It's just a big group, and one of the things that we considered is whether we should separate them in 2 or 3 groups so that they could actually have a better chance to participate. And with that reduced opportunity to participate comes sort of reduced commitment from them. So the commitment of some of them was probably not as strong as we would have hoped, but it's that feeling that they can contribute meaningfully, which I don't think was always there. Certainly for a young person without chairing experience to chair effectively a meeting of 21 people and sort of articulate that advice, it's been more difficult. So I think we can definitely ensure geographic representation through the recruitment process. The idea of a ward representation just gives that, but it doesn't mean that it needs to be necessarily one-to-one, but absolutely making sure that it's diverse geographically, as well as some of the other sort of leadership roles that those young people might have had in their experience and in their communities.
Thank you very much. I've got no other call. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you, Councillor Casey, for suggesting I speak. So I'm the liaison councillor for the Disability Advisory Panel, and I completely agree with your comments Councillor Casey about the richness that the panels provide. It gave me completely different perspective being amongst the panel and hearing their issues and hearing what they have to go through on a daily basis, which I think is going to be valuable for all councillors going forward. I also think that the way that the panels have been set up to react and respond to advice in our policies is good, but then there's so much leadership that we're missing out on, and hopefully that will come through in the next term, because it would be good if we weren't just asking them for advice, but actually responding and letting them set the agenda of the issues they want to see addressed and how council can get in behind and support those issues. So that is my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I really enjoyed being the council liaison for the youth panel in the last term. I've been listening carefully because whilst I guess my impression at the end of the last term was that a smaller number of youth panel members was the way to go. I heard very clearly, particularly from the youth panel members who came from the south and a couple from the west, that they wanted to see the numbers left the same. So I'm trying to weigh out the discussion at the moment. I wonder though if the numbers, because I agree completely with Councillor Filipaina. I wonder if the numbers of 21 isn't such an issue if we look at the way the meetings are conducted. And I found one of the challenges to be that we all sit around either this table or big tables downstairs. I often found it as just a refit of how we govern, how we meet. And that's not the most conducive way to get the best out of young people. At times we would, break up into little groups, but the meeting structures are very much the same as what we have. You get officers, they present to everybody. We're in a large group. They're moving very quickly through an agenda. They only have 2.5, 3 hours together. And granted my background in youth development, I never found it to be the most effective way to garner reflection from them and their input. And so I would have to agree. I don't see the numbers as being the issue as long as the meetings are conducted and trained in a way where they'll be able to have some input. One of the things we did in the last term was we had like an overnight stay with the young people where we all got out. We went out to the marae and Point Chev, just over here somewhere, and it gave them the opportunity to be together. The challenge was they couldn't all be there, so that's always going to be the ability to get people there. But I'm confident that if we are to vote to keep the numbers at the same as what they are, that the structure of the meetings are such that will really encourage their feedback. And I think we've got to look at some of the way TSI run, and how you have the stickers, because the chairing and all that can happen, but it's not. I think we're just trying to mirror the functions, and that for me has been the issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe if I can just put a question back, and thank you, Councillor Collins. I think there's some interesting material in that, but to you and to Councillor Casey, I'm just trying to figure out what the argument is for treating the youth panel differently from the other demographic panels. Because 21, I think, Councillor Collins, you started off with the point that you had the impression that the smaller number was the way to go, and I listened carefully to that. It may be that we, if there was a worry, we've got the assurance about geographic representation, but if there was a worry, we still have the ability to take it up to 12 in this case. But is there a case for dealing with the youth advisory panel differently from the other 5 panels? That's the real question I've got in my mind. Councillor Casey, have you got any thoughts on that?
For me, the essence of this change is to break the geographical link between the young person we're selecting for their lived experience and networks and the fact that they live in a certain part of the region. And, at the panel, the members have their name and then their ward or their And there is no link. There is no link between the young person representing us on the Youth Advisory Panel and the fact they live there. And so whether it's 21 was representing the 21 local boards, 13 is the wards, I'm suggesting 12. So there's no link. And it's up to the liaison councils will be on the selection panel. So it's up to us to select a good cross-section to represent the youth of the region. So I think it's really important that some local boards have their own youth panels. And you can imagine if you're the young person representing Albert Eden and they also have a youth advisory panel, it's like, what is my role relative to them? I'm very clear, the role of the youth advisory panel is for the governing body of Auckland Council. They give us advice. We raise the visibility of their issues and try to help them. So it's a creature of this chamber, not a creature of the local boards. And I think that's what I want to see in reducing the number to whatever, to break the geographical link, but make sure we've got a geographical spread.
Thank you. Look, Councillor Newman.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And the discussion's been interesting. I mean, 3 years ago, we had the recommendation that stemmed from the Martin Jenkins report, and actually we decided in the end to go with the 21 members of the Youth Advisory Panel, and I voted for that. But I've listened carefully to the arguments and read the report. Also, having been a member of the Seniors Advisory Panel, I know that it's perfect. I think it's perfectly achievable to have geographic representation, notwithstanding the fact that there isn't a requirement for representation from every part of Auckland, because the skill sets and the lived experiences Councillor Casey is reflecting is something that is inherent to the selection process. So I'm happy to go with the recommendations from the officers, and would expect that the interview and appointment process will be mindful of the fact that there is a need to ensure a diversity of lived experiences, which will probably reflect, I would imagine, some geographic spread, but I reflect back on the last term. I do think, I'm not quite sure ultimately what the constituency was that the young people were representing from the 21 areas. I think that we did want to have the lived experience that they could offer, and that wasn't necessarily dependent on their postcode. It was a part of it, but it wasn't essential. And I would imagine that the selection process will address that need if we go from 21 down to 8 to 12, wherever the number might ultimately fall. And I do think that there is an issue around resourcing and remuneration. For 21 people, that is a lot of money. That's a lot of money, and it is ratepayers' money. So I'm happy to go with the recommendations, and I would imagine that this will be a matter that the officers and the liaison councillor will continue to monitor. But I think that the decision taken last time was probably not the right one in hindsight, and now is an opportunity to address that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. This is, I was on the liaison council on the youth council the time before last. For me, I could support the recommendation if we would really focus on supporting local boards and having a youth council, because it's really inconsistent across the region, and I think that's where the local is really important. Those young people that are living in those areas know what the issues are, have the networks, and they can actually, with support from the local board, can actually affect change and positive things happening, and they can be informed by that. It probably is a little bit lost having local board or ward representatives around this table, because it is a tricky thing. You're not asking them to do projects, you're asking them to give advice on our policies which shape the way we create Auckland for our young people And so that's at that level I see the Youth Council, and I don't think we've used it for that enough. I think that's should be our focus for the Youth Council. I do think there's got to be some geographical considerations when you're choosing a panel to advise the governing body, because people's experiences are quite different. Not the one that can do the best speech or, goes to the nicest school or whatever, or can get here more easily. I think we've got to be careful of that. But I do think it would be maybe better to do, I've sort of been here and there listening to my colleagues and going, yeah, that'd be great to have that. But I think you want a smaller and more effective bunch, because I've seen what happens. 8 people can't come this month. This is happening with exams. This is, and you don't get the full body anyway quite often, which is quite sad because they don't get to participate. I think, I just wondered what we could put in place for local boards to really support having the development of a fully functioning youth council in their own area.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, Councillor Filipaino.
Your Worship, I know I've spoken, so I'm not going to speak again, but I got a question of clarification.
Sure.
If that's okay.
Yep.
In regards to what Councillor Newman said, and he mentioned how much it would cost for the current number, and if we ended up reducing it to, say, 12, and the cost is still going to be the same if it was 12 or 21 in regards to payment, is it?
No.
Isn't it, apart from the increase that you've asked in here? So that's the first question. What they're currently getting, the Youth Advisory Panel currently getting, I know you've asked for increase, but if there wasn't a request for the increase, would that the payment still be the same if there was 12?
So the proposal to increase the remuneration of the Youth Advisory Panel to put it at the same level as the other panel, that increase gets compensated by the decrease in numbers. So there's about between $30,000 and $40,000 extra if we were going to keep the number of members at 21 and pay them the same as the other panels. So if you reduce the number and increase the pay, it basically balances out. Yeah. If you increase the pay but don't reduce the number, you had another $30,000 to $40,000.
Yeah, on a quick reflection, I think the argument is important that we pay the young people the same. I just regard that as discriminatory that we pay them less. But if we keep their number at 21, we'd be spending 2.6 times more on the youth than we would on any other panel, and that doesn't seem to me to be fair either. So.
Yeah, sorry, Your Worship, that's the reason why I've asked the question in regards to the number staying at 21, for us to pay the same amount as what the other demographic panels will be are receiving. We've had to increase that so they're on parity. So, no, look, this is why I wanted to ask that question on clarification. Thank you.
That's a fair point. Look, I'm having listened to the conversation and not having any particular axe to grind on the issue, I'm going to make the assumption that the majority of people are in favour of 8 to 12 rather than 21. But if anybody would like to have a show of hands just to indicate views of councillors, I'm happy to take that. But otherwise, I'll put the recommendations that we have at the moment on the assumption that 8 to 12, with the guarantee that we'll get fair geographic balance. I think that's probably where the majority of members are sitting. So I'm going to make that assumption if you're comfortable with that. If you want to have a separate vote on it, I'm happy likewise. Councillor Darby.
Just a small point unrelated to that. There's been some discussion. I've had this discussion with you, Mr Mayor, in the last couple of weeks with Councillor Hills, now the Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, Councillor Coombe, and Councillor Walker mentions it as well, is the importance of elevating our discussion and seeking advice on climate change. Now, I'm not sure, I don't think it's appropriate right now to land a decision that we have a climate advisory panel. We've got the climate action framework out for discussion with our communities. I think that we just need to identify whether we proceed, and I think it is likely that we do proceed with a climate advisory panel that is the product of that feedback and our consideration of the framework. But I guess I'm just reinforcing some of the discussion here and highlighting it at this point that we need to go back and look at that. We do have an advisory panel now. It's just not visible to us.
Exactly.
It's a panel that is to support our staff, and it's done a great job in shaping up the framework. It probably needs to be looked at, maybe enlarging, but rather than try and scope it now, let's park it with the Chief Executive to bring that back later on.
Thank you, Councillor. I concur with that view. We have got a panel, and I can't tell you that it's had any visibility. That doesn't mean to say that it hasn't been doing anything. It is reporting to staff, and what we'll want with the new Environment and Climate Change Committee of the Whole, I think, is a greater visibility of how we can feed in information. I've had this discussion with Councillor Walker, actually, how we can feed in information from that community. So if I can accept your suggestion that we should park it but continue to look at it and try to find the most effective way of engaging with the community, I think that's a good way to go. Look, I'm conscious of the time and the fact that we don't have lunch today. My apologies. It was a short agenda and the decision was taken that we'd finish by lunch. So I think we're almost there on this thing. So what I'm suggesting is that we vote on the recommendations that we have there. It's been moved and seconded. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And if you want to distinguish, Councillor, that you're not in favour of the youth panel recommendation but support the rest of it, that's probably the best way to do it. Yep. No, thank you very much for that. Right, we move now on to item number 15. Marguerite, if I can ask you to stay exactly where you are.